The morning sun poured its golden light over the city as Walter Harrington stepped out of his modest home, dressed in his usual attire, a simple plaid shirt, a pair of well-worn jeans and scuffed leather shoes. He looked like any other elderly man. His face was etched with the lines of a life lived fully, and his eyes, though kind, held a sharpness that hinted at a deeper story. Walter climbed into his old but reliable car, a modest sedan that had served him well for years. Today he had decided it was time for an upgrade. Though he valued simplicity, Walter had an appreciation for fine craftsmanship and had saved for years to treat himself to something special. He headed to the city's most prestigious luxury car dealership, a place known for its sleek vehicles and equally polished staff. The dealership gleamed in the morning light, its glass walls showcasing an array of pristine luxury cars. As Walter entered, his footsteps echoed softly against the marble floor. He paused for a moment, taking in the elegant showroom, before glancing around in search of assistance. The staff, all immaculately dressed in tailored suits, stood clustered by the reception desk. They exchanged glances, their smiles polite but distant, before turning back to their conversation. Walter approached one of the salespeople, a man with slick-back hair and an air of superiority. "Excuse me," Walter began, his voice steady but polite. "I'm looking to buy a sedan. Could you help me?" The salesman glanced at Walter's attire, his eyes lingering on the scuffed shoes and simple shirt, before forcing a tight-lipped smile. "Sure," he said, his tone dripping with disinterest. "Feel free to look around. Someone will assist you shortly." Walter nodded and began to browse the showroom. As he moved between the polished vehicles, he overheard whispers from the staff. "Why is he even here?" one voice muttered. "Probably just a window shopper," another added with a chuckle. Walter ignored the remarks, his focus on the cars. He stopped in front of a sleek sedan, its glossy black finish gleaming under the showroom lights. Running his hand over the smooth surface, he felt a sense of satisfaction. "This one," he murmured to himself, "this is the one." He turned to find a salesperson but noticed a change in the room's energy. A young couple had entered, their designer clothes and confident demeanor immediately drawing the staff's attention. The same salesman who had brushed Walter off rushed to greet them, his smile now genuine. "Welcome. Can I get you a drink? Perhaps some coffee or sparkling water?" he asked eagerly. Walter watched as the couple was showered with attention. He felt a pang of frustration but remained calm. Approaching the reception desk where the floor manager Richard Coleman stood chatting with three other salespeople, Walter cleared his throat. "Excuse me," Walter said. "I need assistance. I'd like to buy that sedan over there." Richard turned to him, his expression a mix of irritation and condescension. "Sir," he began, his voice clipped, "as you can see we're very busy today. Why don't you come back tomorrow?" Walter frowned. "I'm here now, and I'd like to make a purchase. Isn't it your job to assist every customer who walks in?" Richard let out a faint chuckle, shaking his head. "Look, sir, we have high-demand customers here today, people who are serious buyers. I don't mean to be rude, but I think you're in the wrong place." Walter's eyes narrowed. "And how do you know I can't buy this car?" The staff exchanged amused glances, stifling laughter. Richard smirked. "Well, if you can afford it, come back tomorrow. Maybe we'll have time for you then." Walter's jaw tightened. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the dealership. As he reached his car, he heard Richard mutter, "Wasting time on window shoppers. Why'd we let him stay so long?" Driving home, Walter's mind raced. He wasn't angry, he was resolute. The staff's behavior wasn't just rude, it was emblematic of a deeper problem. They judged people based on appearances, failing to recognize the value of character. Walter knew he couldn't let this slide. Once home, Walter made a few calls. His years in the shadows of power had built him a network of influential contacts. By the time the sun set, he had arranged a series of meetings and negotiated a deal. As he hung up the phone for the last time that evening, a satisfied smile spread across his face. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "things are going to change." The following morning, the dealership buzzed with its usual activity. Staff members shuffled paperwork, polished the vehicles on display, and exchanged polite greetings with early customers. The floor manager, Richard Coleman, stood by the reception desk with a steaming cup of coffee in hand, his expression one of casual authority. As the clock struck 9, the glass doors swung open, and Walter Harrington stepped inside. Dressed in the same simple clothes as the day before, he walked with a calm yet purposeful stride. His appearance immediately drew Richard's attention. "Oh, not this guy again," Richard muttered to one of the salespeople beside him. "Why does he keep coming back?" The salesperson shrugged, smirking. "Maybe he thinks we've got a discount section somewhere." The two shared a quiet laugh as Walter approached. Richard set his coffee cup down and crossed his arms, his tone oozing insincerity. "Good morning, sir. You've come back, I see. How can we help you today?" Walter offered a small smile. "Actually, I'm here to make an announcement. I think you'll want to hear this." Richard raised an eyebrow, his amusement barely concealed. "An announcement? Look, sir, we're very busy." Walter interrupted, holding up a folder he had brought with him. "I suggest you make time. You might find this important." Richard sighed, grabbing the folder with little enthusiasm. He opened it and began skimming the contents, his brow furrowed and his face slowly drained of color. He flipped through the pages again, his hands trembling slightly. The other salespeople leaned in, their curiosity piqued. "What is this?" Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Walter's smile widened. "Those are the official documents confirming my purchase of this dealership. As of this morning, I am the new owner." The room fell into stunned silence. The salespeople exchanged wide-eyed glances, their previous laughter now replaced with uneasy whispers. Richard's mouth opened and closed as he struggled to form a response. This can't be right," he stammered. "How could you—" Walter clasped his hands behind his back, his posture calm but commanding. "How? It's simple. I made a few calls, negotiated a deal, and wrote a check. You see, Mr. Coleman, I don't judge people by their appearances. But clearly you and your staff do, and yesterday you made a grave mistake." The tension in the room was palpable as Walter continued. "When I walked into this dealership, I expected respect and professionalism. What I received instead was mockery and dismissal. You assumed I wasn't worth your time, but you couldn't have been more wrong." Richard's face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and panic. "Sir, I didn't mean— Look, there's been a misunderstanding." Walter's expression hardened. "The only misunderstanding here is your belief that customers must look a certain way to be deserving of your respect. That ends today." The sales staff, who had been lingering nearby, now stood frozen in place. The weight of Walter's words hung heavy in the air. Richard attempted to recover, forcing a smile that came off as more of a grimace. "Well, I'm sure we can work things out. You're the boss now, after all." Walter stepped closer, his calm demeanor radiating authority. "That's correct. I am the boss. And my first order of business is addressing the toxic culture that's festered under your leadership. You dismissed me, disrespected me, and created an environment where arrogance thrives. That stops now." He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the final blow. "Effective immediately, you're fired." The room erupted into murmurs as Richard's face turned ashen. "Fired? You can't be serious. You need me to run this place?" Walter's voice remained steady. "I need a team that treats every customer with respect, not one that mocks them behind their backs. Your time here is over." Richard tried to protest, but Walter raised a hand, silencing him. "The paperwork is done. The ownership has changed. Now please collect your belongings and leave." One of the salespeople, a man who had also laughed at Walter the day before, attempted to intervene. "Sir, don't you think this is a bit extreme? Richard's been here for years." Walter turned to face him, his gaze unwavering. "Ah, yes. You were one of the people who found my presence so amusing yesterday. I remember the way you dismissed me as a window shopper." He stepped closer, his voice firm. "You're fired as well." The man's face fell, his protests dying in his throat. Walter moved down the line, addressing each salesperson who had contributed to his mistreatment. Those who had mocked or ignored him were dismissed on the spot. A few pleaded for a second chance, but Walter stood firm. "I'm not firing you out of spite," he explained. "I'm doing this because this dealership needs to change, and it starts with the people who represent it." Among the staff, one young woman stood silently, her expression a mix of shock and uncertainty. Walter turned to her, his tone softening. What's your name?" "Claire," she said hesitantly. "I remember you from yesterday," Walter said. "You greeted me with a smile even though you weren't assigned to sales. That small act of kindness didn't go unnoticed." Claire looked surprised. I was just trying to be polite." Walter nodded. and that's exactly the kind of behavior this dealership needs. Congratulations, Claire. As of today, you're the new floor manager. Claire's eyes widened. Me? But I've only been here 6 months. Walter smiled. Seniority doesn't matter to me. What matters is how you treat others. I believe you have what it takes to lead. The remaining staff watched in stunned silence as Claire nodded, her voice trembling. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. Walter turned to address the entire room. This dealership will no longer tolerate arrogance or discrimination. From now on, every customer will be treated with respect, regardless of how they look or what you think they can afford. If anyone has a problem with that, they can leave now. The staff exchanged nervous glances but said nothing. Walter's authority was undeniable, and they knew he meant every word. As the morning unfolded, the dealership began its transformation. Walter wasted no time implementing changes, ensuring that the toxic culture he had witnessed was replaced with one built on respect and professionalism. By the end of the day, the dealership felt like a different place. Walter stood by the showroom window, watching as customers entered with smiles and left with satisfaction. He felt a sense of accomplishment, not from his newfound power, but from the positive change he had initiated. The following morning, the atmosphere at the dealership was noticeably different. The showroom, once a place where judgment and arrogance thrived, now carried an air of nervous anticipation. Those staff members who remained understood that their new boss was not someone to be trifled with. Walter Harrington had made it clear. Respect and professionalism were now non-negotiable. Walter arrived early, his simple attire contrasting sharply with the gleaming luxury cars that lined the showroom floor. Claire, the newly promoted floor manager, greeted him at the door, a mix of determination and nerves in her posture. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice steady but cautious. "I've been reviewing our policies, as you suggested. There's definitely room for improvement." Walter nodded, his expression warm but focused. "Good morning, Claire. I trust you'll take the lead in implementing those changes? Let me know if you need support." "Yes, sir," Claire replied. "I'll do my best." "I know you will," Walter said. "That's why you're in this position." As the morning progressed, Walter observed the dealership's operations closely. Customers began trickling in, their curiosity piqued by whispers of new ownership. Walter noted how the remaining staff interacted with them, stepping in occasionally to offer guidance or correct behavior. His presence was quiet but commanding, a constant reminder of the standards he now expected. One customer, a middle-aged man in a casual jacket, wandered into the showroom, his eyes scanning the sleek vehicles on display. Walter noticed him hesitate near a particularly luxurious sedan, his hand hovering over the price tag. A young salesman, clearly still adjusting to the new culture, approached him with a polite smile. "Good morning, sir," the salesman said. "Can I help you with anything today?" The man looked up, clearly surprised by the attentive greeting. "Oh, I'm just looking," he said quickly, his tone almost apologetic. "That's perfectly fine," the salesman replied, his demeanor respectful. "If you have any questions, I'm here to help." Walter watched the interaction with satisfaction. The changes were taking root. He stepped forward to address the customer directly. "It's a fine car, isn't it?" Walter said, his voice warm. The man nodded, his eyes flicking to Walter's modest attire. "It's beautiful, way out of my budget though." Walter smiled. "You'd be surprised how flexible we can be. Let me know if you'd like to talk numbers." The man chuckled, relaxing slightly. "I appreciate that. Most places wouldn't even bother with someone like me." "Well," Walter said, his tone firm but kind, "this isn't most places anymore." As the customer continued browsing, Claire approached Walter with a clipboard in hand. "Mr. Harrington, I've gone through yesterday's feedback from our team meeting. Most of the staff seems on board with the changes, but a few are struggling to adjust." Walter raised an eyebrow. "Struggling how?" Claire hesitated. "Some are resistant to the idea of treating all customers equally. They're used to chasing commissions from high-end sales and ignoring anyone who doesn't fit the mold." Walter sighed, his gaze sweeping the showroom. "Old habits die hard. Schedule a one-on-one meeting with each of them. I'll handle it personally." Claire nodded. "Understood." The day wore on, and Walter's commitment to change remained unwavering. He spent time observing, coaching, and even stepping into customer interactions when necessary. His approach was hands-on but never overbearing, earning him a mix of respect and admiration from the staff. By late afternoon, the dealership was bustling. A young couple entered. their casual attire and hesitant demeanor reminiscent of Walter's visit the day before. They lingered near the entrance, clearly unsure of where to start. Walter approached them with a welcoming smile. "Good afternoon," he said. "Looking for anything in particular?" The man glanced at his partner before replying, "We're not sure. We've been saving for a while and this is our first time looking at cars like these. It's obviously our best option to keep financial resources in the family. Wait until our kids get older before considering these cars." Walter nodded, his expression understanding. "It's a big decision. Take your time. If you need any assistance, Claire here can help you." Claire, who had been nearby, stepped forward with a warm smile. "Welcome. Let me show you a few options that might suit your needs." As Claire guided the couple through the showroom, Walter felt a sense of pride. The dealership was transforming into the inclusive and welcoming space he had envisioned. Customers who might have been dismissed in the past were now treated with the respect they deserved. And it was paying off. Word of the new ownership and the shift in culture had begun to spread, attracting a steady stream of visitors. Later that evening, as the showroom quieted down, Walter gathered the staff for a brief meeting. They stood in a semicircle, their expressions ranging from eager to apprehensive. "I want to thank you all for your efforts today," Walter began, his tone sincere. "Change isn't easy, and I know this hasn't been a simple adjustment for some of you, but I've already seen progress and I'm confident we're moving in the right direction. And this is a start of a major change." He paused, his gaze sweeping the group. "Remember, this isn't just about selling cars, it's about building trust, treating people with dignity, and creating an environment where everyone feels valued. If we can do that, success will follow." The staff murmured their agreement, their respect for Walter evident. Claire stepped forward, speaking on behalf of the group. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Your vision has already made a difference. We're proud to be part of this." Walter smiled. "The pride is mutual. Let's keep building something we can all be proud of." As the staff dispersed, Walter lingered in the showroom, his thoughts drifting. The dealership's transformation was only beginning, but he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just about proving a point to those who had dismissed him, it was about creating a legacy of respect and integrity. Stepping outside, he looked back at the gleaming showroom, now illuminated against the evening sky. A place that had once been a symbol of superficiality and arrogance was becoming something meaningful. And Walter Harrington was just getting started. The dealership hummed with the energy of change, but not everyone embraced it. Walter Harrington knew from experience that transformation often faced resistance, and as he observed the team over the next few days, it became clear who was struggling to adapt. Some employees grumbled under their breath, their attitudes betraying a reluctance to let go of old habits. Walter's focus remained on fostering an environment of respect and inclusion, but he wasn't naive. As he walked through the dealership, he noticed subtle signs of defiance, a lack of enthusiasm in customer interactions, whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when he approached, and pointed glares from certain staff members. Claire met him in his office late one afternoon, her clipboard in hand. "Mr. Harrington, I've noticed some tension among the team," she said carefully. "A few employees are still resistant to the new approach. I think it's affecting morale." Walter leaned back in his chair, his expression contemplative. "Change is uncomfortable, Claire, especially for those who have benefited from the old ways. But this isn't negotiable. Do you have names?" She hesitated but nodded. "Yes, it's mostly the senior sales staff. Mark, Stephen, and Greg. They're the top earners, and I think they're worried the new culture will hurt their commissions." Walter's eyes narrowed slightly. Worried about commissions or worried about being held accountable? Claire glanced down at her clipboard, her voice quiet but firm. "Maybe both." He sighed, rising from his chair. "Let's deal with it." Walter called a meeting with the three men the next morning. They filed into the conference room, their body language defensive. Mark, a tall man with a sharp suit and sharper tongue, was the first to speak. "With all due respect, Mr. Harrington," he began, his tone barely masking his irritation, "we've been in this business a long time. We know what works and what doesn't. This new, inclusive approach, well, it's a nice idea, but it's not practical. People come here for luxury, not charity." Walter regarded him calmly, his hands clasped behind his back. "And what exactly do you think isn't practical, Mark?" Mark exchanged a glance with Stephen and Greg before responding. Spending time on customers who can't afford our cars, it's a waste of resources. We should be focusing on the high-end buyers, the ones who actually close deals. Greg chimed in, his tone smug. It's simple math, sir. The more time we spend on serious buyers, the better our numbers. Walter listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When they finished, he stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. Let me tell you a story. A few days ago, I walked into this dealership dressed as I am now. Do you know what happened? The men exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. I was ignored, Walter continued, his voice sharp, dismissed, laughed at behind my back because I didn't look like someone who belonged here. And yet, here I am, your boss. Do you understand the irony? Mark's face reddened, but he managed to hold his ground. With all due respect, Mr. Harrington, you're not most customers. Walter's eyes hardened. And that's exactly the problem. You judge me based on my appearance. How many other potential customers have you dismissed the same way? How many deals have you lost because you assumed they couldn't afford to be here? The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Walter's gaze swept over them, unflinching. This isn't about charity, it's about respect. Every person who walks through those doors deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of what you think they can afford. If you can't do that, you don't belong here. Stephen shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Look, we didn't mean to offend anyone, but we're just trying to do our jobs. Then do them better, Walter said sharply. This dealership will succeed because of its reputation, not despite it. Treat people right, and the sales will come. Mark opened his mouth to argue, but Walter held up a hand. Enough. You've made your positions clear and I've made mine. You have a choice. Adapt or find employment elsewhere. The tension lingered after the meeting, but Walter was undeterred. He knew that action spoke louder than words and he was determined to lead by example. Over the next few days, he spent more time on the sales floor, engaging with customers and staff alike. He made a point to acknowledge every visitor, whether they were dressed in designer suits or faded jeans, setting the tone for the entire team. One afternoon, a woman in her late 50s entered the showroom. Her floral dress and worn sandals drew a few skeptical glances from the sales staff, but Walter intercepted her before anyone could make assumptions. Good afternoon, he said warmly. What brings you in today? The woman hesitated, clearly unsure of herself. Oh, I'm just looking. My son's been saving for a car and I wanted to see what's out there. Walter nodded. That's wonderful. Let me show you a few options. He spent the next half hour guiding her through the inventory, answering her questions with patience and respect. By the time she left, she was smiling, her confidence restored. Claire approached him as the woman exited. You have a way of making people feel seen, she said quietly. Walter shrugged. That's the whole point, isn't it? The resistance from Mark, Stephen, and Greg gradually began to fade. They saw the impact of Walter's approach in real time, how customers responded to being treated with respect, how sales began to climb, and how the dealership's reputation improved. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it was undeniable. By the end of the week, Walter called another staff meeting. This time, the atmosphere was different. The initial tension had given way to a cautious optimism, a recognition that change could be a good thing. I want to thank you all for your efforts, Walter said, addressing the group. I know this hasn't been easy, but I've seen progress and I'm proud of what we're building here. Remember, this isn't just about selling cars. It's about creating a space where everyone feels valued. The staff nodded, their expressions a mix of relief and determination. Claire stood beside Walter, her confidence growing with each passing day. Together, they were turning the dealership into something more than a showroom. It was becoming a symbol of respect, inclusivity, and second chances. As weeks passed, Walter Harrington's influence reshaped the dealership into something unrecognizable compared to its previous state. The air of arrogance that had once dominated the showroom was now replaced with a sense of professionalism and camaraderie. Even the most skeptical staff members, like Mark and Stephen, began to adapt to the new culture, albeit reluctantly. The sales figures started to reflect the change. Customers from all walks of life were now walking through the doors, knowing they'd be treated with respect and care. Walter, however, was not the type to rest on his laurels. He knew that change was fragile and could easily crumble if not reinforced. He spent his days on the floor, greeting customers, observing staff, and ensuring that the lessons of respect and inclusion weren't just words but actions. One morning, as Walter walked through the dealership, a man in his late 30s entered. He was dressed in jeans and a simple t-shirt, his sneakers scuffed from use. He seemed hesitant, glancing around as if unsure whether he was in the right place. Walter noticed the looks from some of the staff, a flicker of the old judgmental attitude surfacing. He intercepted the man before anyone else could approach. "Good morning," Walter said warmly. "Welcome to Harrington Motors. What brings you in today?" The man smiled nervously. I'm just looking. I don't think I can really afford anything here, but I've always dreamed of owning a luxury car. Figured it couldn't hurt to look." Walter's eyes softened. "Dreams are a good starting point," he said. "Let me show you some options. You might be surprised." Walter spent the next hour with the man, walking him through the dealership's inventory and discussing financing options. By the end of the conversation, the man's face lit up with hope. "This might actually be possible," the man said, almost to himself. "Thank you, I didn't think anyone would take me seriously." Walter placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "Every customer deserves to be taken seriously. Come back when you're ready, we'll be here." That interaction, though small, sent ripples through the staff. Those who had once resisted Walter's changes now saw firsthand the impact of his approach. Mark, who had initially dismissed Walter's philosophy as naive, approached him later that day. "Mr. Harrington," he began, clearing his throat awkwardly, "I just wanted to say, I see what you're doing here, and I was wrong. It's working." Walter smiled, clapping him on the back. "It's not about being right or wrong, Mark. It's about doing what's right. Keep it up." But not all the changes were met with such acceptance. Greg, the last holdout among the old guard, continued to push back subtly. He followed the rules when Walter was watching, but reverted to his old ways when left unsupervised. Claire noticed this during her rounds as the new floor manager and brought it to Walter's attention. "Greg isn't on board," she said one evening as they reviewed the day's performance. "He still treats customers differently based on how they look. It's bad for morale and worse for business." Walter's face hardened. "I was hoping he'd come around, but it seems he's made his choice. Schedule a meeting with him tomorrow morning." The next day, Walter met with Greg in his office. The atmosphere was tense as Greg sat across from him, his arms crossed defensively. "Greg," Walter began, his tone calm but firm, "I've noticed you're struggling to adapt to the new culture here." Greg scoffed. "Struggling? I've been here for years. I know what works. This whole respect and inclusion thing, it's just not realistic. People want luxury. They want exclusivity. You're watering down the brand." Walter leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Greg's. "Respect and inclusion don't dilute the brand, they elevate it. Our sales have increased and our reputation has improved. But you're still clinging to the past." Greg shrugged, his expression indifferent. "Some people just aren't cut out for this place. That's not my fault." Walter's jaw tightened. "You're right about one thing. Some people aren't cut out for this place. But it's not the customers. It's you." Greg's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your time here is over," Walter said evenly. "You're dismissed, effective immediately." Greg shot to his feet. "You can't be serious. I've been here longer than anyone. You can't just fire me?" "I can, and I am," Walter said, standing to meet Greg's glare. "This dealership is about more than selling cars. It's about how we treat people. If you can't embody that, you don't belong here." Greg stormed out, muttering under his breath, but Walter didn't waver. He knew this was necessary to protect the culture he was building. By the end of the day, news of Greg's dismissal had spread. The staff who remained understood that Walter meant what he said about creating a respectful environment. Those who had been hesitant began to embrace the changes, realizing that their own jobs depended on their ability to adapt. Claire approached Walter as he prepared to leave for the evening. "That was a bold move," she said, "but I think it was the right one." Walter smiled tiredly. "Sometimes, doing the right thing isn't easy, but it's always worth it." As Walter drove home that evening, he reflected on the day's events. The dealership was finally starting to align with his vision, but he knew the journey was far from over. Change took time, and he was prepared to see it through. For Walter, this wasn't just about running a successful business. It was about making a difference, proving that respect and integrity could thrive even in the most unlikely places. And as the sun set on another day, he felt a deep sense of purpose, knowing that he was building something that truly mattered. The next day brought a quiet but palpable shift in the dealership's atmosphere. Without Greg's resistance holding back progress, the team began to function more cohesively. Walter noticed the change almost immediately as he made his rounds through the showroom. Sales associates were more attentive to customers, and the tension that had once hung in the air was replaced with a sense of camaraderie. Claire, the new floor manager, had fully embraced her role. Her natural ability to connect with people, coupled with her growing confidence, made her a standout leader. Walter observed her in action as she guided a young salesperson through the process of assisting a customer who was nervous about financing options. Her patience and encouragement set the tone for the rest of the team. Mid-morning, a familiar face walked through the dealership's glass doors. It was the man Walter had assisted days earlier, the one in jeans and a simple t-shirt. This time, he looked more confident, carrying a folder under his arm. "Welcome back," Walter said warmly, stepping forward to greet him. "What brings you in today?" The man smiled, holding up the folder. "I've been crunching the numbers and I think I'm ready to make this happen. I want to buy the sedan we talked about." Walter's smile widened. "That's great to hear. Let's get you started." Fine. He called over one of the younger sales associates, a woman named Dana, and introduced her to the customer. "Dana, this is Mr. Rivera. He's interested in the sedan we discussed. I'll let you take it from here." Dana nodded enthusiastically and guided Mr. Rivera toward the car. Walter stayed back, watching with satisfaction as she confidently walked him through the details, her professionalism shining through. By noon, Mr. Rivera had completed the paperwork and was handed the keys to his new car. Walter stood beside him as the team clapped and congratulated him. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington," Rivera said, his voice thick with emotion. "You made this possible. I never thought I'd own a car like this." Walter shook his hand firmly. "You earned it, Mr. Rivera. Enjoy every mile." As Mr. Rivera drove away, the team buzzed with excitement. Claire approached Walter with a grin. "That was amazing. The way you treated him, the way the team worked together. It's starting to feel like a real family here." Walter nodded, a quiet pride in his eyes. "That's the goal. Everyone who walks through these doors deserves to feel valued." Later that afternoon, Walter called a team meeting. The staff gathered in the break room, their curiosity piqued by the unexpected announcement. Walter stood at the front, his hands resting on the table as he addressed them. "I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the progress we've made," he began, his voice steady. "When I first took over, I saw potential in this team, but I also saw a culture that needed to change. Today, I see that change happening." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "But we're not done. Building a culture of respect and inclusion is an ongoing process. It's not just about selling cars, it's about how we treat each other and our customers. That's what will set us apart." The team nodded, their expressions thoughtful. Walter continued, "I want to thank those of you who have embraced this vision, who have worked hard to make this dealership a place people can trust. Your efforts haven't gone unnoticed." He turned to Claire, who was seated near the front, "And I want to give special recognition to Claire. In just a few short weeks, she stepped up as a leader and set an example for all of us." The team erupted in applause, and Claire blushed, clearly surprised by the praise. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "but I couldn't have done it without your support." Walter smiled. "Leadership isn't about doing everything yourself. It's about inspiring others to do their best, and you've done that." As the meeting ended, the staff returned to their stations with a renewed sense of purpose. Walter lingered in the break room, reflecting on how far they had come. The dealership was transforming, not just in sales numbers but in spirit. For Walter, this was the real victory. That evening, as Walter prepared to leave for the day, Claire approached him near the showroom entrance. "Mr. Harrington," she said hesitantly, "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about building a culture. It's inspiring, but it's also a lot of responsibility." Walter turned to her, his expression kind. "Leadership always is. But you don't have to do it alone. You have a team to support you, and I'm here whenever you need guidance." Claire nodded, a small smile forming. "Thank you. That means a lot." Walter placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're doing great, Claire. Trust yourself. You've got this." As Walter drove home, he felt a sense of fulfillment. The dealership was on the right track and the team was beginning to thrive under the new culture. But he also knew there was more work to be done. Change wasn't something that happened overnight, it was a journey, and Walter was committed to seeing it through. For the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. The life he was building now, far removed from his past, was one he could be proud of. As the city lights blurred past his car window, Walter allowed himself a moment to simply enjoy the ride, knowing that tomorrow held the promise of even greater things. The weeks following the meeting brought a profound shift to the dealership. Under Claire's leadership and Walter's guidance, the team began to gel in ways they hadn't before. Customer satisfaction surveys poured in, filled with glowing reviews about the exceptional service and welcoming atmosphere. The once toxic dealership was becoming a community hub where people felt valued no matter their background. Walter was a firm believer in leading by example. He spent his days walking the floor, greeting customers and mentoring employees. He shared anecdotes from his years in business, not the darker parts of his past, but lessons about resilience, humility, and the importance of treating people well. One afternoon, a woman named Mrs. Daniels walked into the dealership. She was an elderly widow, dressed in modest clothes that had clearly seen better days. She clutched her purse tightly as she stepped through the glass doors, her nervous eyes darting around the showroom. Walter noticed her immediately and approached with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Welcome to Harrington Motors. How can we help you today?" Mrs. Daniels hesitated before speaking. I'm looking for a reliable car. Nothing fancy, just something that won't break down on me." Walter nodded. "We can definitely help with that. Let me introduce you to someone who will take great care of you." He called over a young associate named Marcus, who had recently joined the team. Walter had been mentoring Marcus, seeing potential in his eagerness to learn and his natural empathy. "Marcus," Walter said, "this is Mrs. Daniels. She's looking for a dependable car. Take your time and make sure she feels comfortable." "Yes, sir," Marcus said, his face lighting up. He turned to Mrs. Daniels and offered his hand. "Right this way, ma'am. I think I have a few options you'll like." Walter watched as Marcus led Mrs. Daniels toward a row of pre-owned vehicles. He felt a surge of pride, not in himself but in the culture they were building. Moments like these reminded him why he had taken on this challenge in the first place. Later that day, Marcus approached Walter, grinning from ear to ear. "Mr. Harrington, Mrs. Daniels just finalized the paperwork. She's driving away in a car she loves." Walter clapped him on the shoulder. "Well done, Marcus. You made her feel valued, and that's what matters most." Marcus beamed. "Thanks for giving me this opportunity, sir. I never thought I'd be in a place like this, learning from someone like you." Walter chuckled. "It's not about where you start, Marcus. It's about where you're willing to go. Keep that attitude, and you'll do great things." As the dealership flourished, word began to spread about its transformation. Customers who had once felt intimidated by the staff's arrogance now recommended the dealership to friends and family. Walter's vision of a respectful, inclusive workplace was becoming a reality. But not everyone was happy about the changes. One morning, as Walter reviewed the monthly sales report in his office, Claire walked in, her expression troubled. "Mr. Harrington, can I speak with you for a moment?" she asked. "Of course," Walter said, gesturing for her to sit. Claire hesitated before sitting down. "It's about some of the employees we warned after your first visit. A few of them, they're not adjusting well. They're following the rules, but their attitudes haven't changed. I've noticed them rolling their eyes at customers who don't look wealthy, and a few have been whispering complaints about how things used to be." Walter's expression darkened slightly. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Claire. This kind of behavior has no place here." "What should we do?" she asked. Walter leaned back in his chair, thinking. It's one thing to enforce rules, but true change requires a shift in mindset. Let's start by meeting with them one-on-one. If they're willing to embrace the culture we're building, we'll give them a chance. But if they continue to undermine the progress we've made, we'll have to let them go. Claire nodded, relief washing over her face. "I'll set up the meetings." Over the next few days, Walter and Claire met with the employees in question. Some were defensive at first, insisting they hadn't done anything wrong, but Walter's calm demeanor and direct questions often left them reflecting on their behavior. One employee, a senior salesman named Greg, no relation to the fired manager, admitted he struggled with the changes. "I'm used to focusing on high-end customers," he confessed. "It's hard to adjust to this new way of thinking." Walter nodded. "I understand it's a big shift, Greg. But this isn't just about selling cars. It's about treating people with respect. If you're willing to embrace that, we'll support you. If not, this might not be the right place for you." Greg looked down, his jaw tightening. After a long pause, he said, "I'll try. I don't want to lose my job." Walter's expression softened. "That's all I ask. Just try. By the end of the week, Walter and Claire had addressed every issue. Some employees showed genuine improvement, while others chose to leave. The dealership continued to evolve, becoming a place where customers felt valued and employees took pride in their work. One evening, as Walter prepared to lock up, Claire approached him with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Harrington, I've been thinking about everything you've done here," she said. "Why did you decide to take over this dealership? I mean, you could have just bought a car somewhere else." Walter paused, his hand resting on the door. He looked out at the showroom, now a beacon of warmth and inclusivity. "Because change doesn't happen by walking away," he said finally. "It happens when you stand your ground and decide to make a difference." Claire smiled, her admiration for Walter evident. "Well, you've definitely made a difference here." Walter nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "And we're just getting started." The following weeks cemented the transformation of Harrington Motors. Word of the dealership's turnaround spread far beyond the city, attracting attention from both customers and industry professionals. The once respective staff who had embraced the new culture now thrived under Claire's leadership, while newer hires brought fresh energy and enthusiasm. For Walter, the dealership was becoming a reflection of the values he had spent his later years cultivating: respect, humility, and service. One afternoon, Walter walked into the dealership carrying a box of donuts, a simple gesture of appreciation for the staff. The room was bustling with activity, employees cheerfully assisting customers, phones ringing, and the faint hum of conversation creating a lively atmosphere. Walter couldn't help but smile. The dealership was no longer just a place to sell cars, it was a community. He placed the box on the break room table and called out, "Take a break when you can, you've all earned it." Laughter and thanks echoed from the staff as they worked, and Walter took a moment to observe the interactions on the floor. He noticed Marcus talking to a young couple, patiently explaining financing options while showing genuine enthusiasm for helping them find the right car. Nearby, a new hire named Maria was discussing safety features with an elderly gentleman, her tone warm and reassuring. Walter's gaze drifted to Claire, who stood near the entrance greeting a new customer. Her confident posture and easy smile reminded him why he had chosen her to lead. She had proven herself time and again, turning challenges into opportunities and building a team that shared her vision. Later that day, as the showroom quieted, Claire approached Walter with a notebook in hand. "Mr. Harrington, I wanted to share something with you," she said, opening the notebook to a page filled with handwritten notes. "I've been keeping track of customer feedback, and there's one comment that keeps coming up." Walter raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" She smiled. "People keep saying how different it feels here. They say it's not just about the cars, it's about how we treat them. One customer even said this was the first time they'd walked into a dealership and felt like they belonged." Walter nodded, his chest swelling with quiet pride. "That's exactly what we set out to do." Claire hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I was also wondering, what's next for you? You've done so much here already. Do you plan to stay involved, or are you thinking about moving on to the next challenge?" Walter leaned back against the counter, his eyes thoughtful. "You know, Claire, when I first walked in here, I didn't have a grand plan. I was just a frustrated customer who wanted to teach some people a lesson. But this place has become something more. It's a reminder that change is always possible, no matter how deep the problems seem." He paused, glancing around the showroom. "I think I'll always have a hand in what happens here. But the truth is, you and the team don't need me to hold your hand anymore. You've got this." Claire nodded, her expression a mix of gratitude and determination. "We won't let you down." That evening, Walter decided it was time to take a step back and let the team truly take ownership of the dealership's success. He had done what he set out to do, and now it was their turn to carry the torch. But there was one last thing he wanted to do before he fully stepped away. The next morning, Walter arrived at the dealership with a sense of purpose. He walked over to Claire's office and handed her a neatly folded piece of paper. "What's this?" she asked, unfolding it. "It's a thank you bonus," Walter said with a smile. "Not just for you, but for the entire team. Consider it a token of my appreciation for everything you've done to turn this place around." Claire's eyes widened as she read the amount. "Mr. Harrington, this is incredibly generous, are you sure?" Walter chuckled. "I'm sure. This isn't just about the money, Claire. It's about showing people that hard work and the right attitude are worth recognizing. Use it to invest in the team, improve the space, or however you see fit." The weeks that followed were filled with bittersweet goodbyes. Walter began transitioning his responsibilities to Claire, ensuring she had everything she needed to lead the dealership into its next chapter. The staff held a small farewell party for him, complete with a cake that read, "Thank you, Mr. Harrington," in bold icing letters. During the gathering, Marcus stood up to say a few words. "Mr. Harrington, when I first started here, I wasn't sure I'd make it. But you believed in me, and that made all the difference. You've shown us what it means to lead with integrity, and I think I speak for everyone when I say we'll carry that lesson forward." Applause filled the room, and Walter nodded, his heart full. "Thank you, Marcus. And thank you all. This place isn't about me, it's about all of you. Keep treating people with respect, and this dealership will continue to thrive." On his final day, Walter walked through the dealership one last time. He stopped at the car he had chosen all those weeks ago, a sleek black sedan that now seemed to gleam with new meaning. Claire approached him with the keys, a wide smile on her face. "Your car is ready, Mr. Harrington," she said. Walter took the keys, running his fingers over the smooth metal. "Thank you, Claire, for everything." As he drove off the lot, Walter felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The dealership was thriving, its reputation rebuilt, and its team stronger than ever. He had turned a moment of disrespect into an opportunity for change, proving that integrity and perseverance could transform even the most challenging situations. The dealership continued to flourish under Claire's leadership, becoming a beacon of excellence in the community. Customers from all walks of life came to Harrington Motors not just for the cars but for the experience, the kindness, respect, and professionalism that Walter had instilled. Walter, now enjoying a quieter life, often drove by the dealership in his sleek sedan. Each time he saw the busy showroom and the smiling faces inside, he felt a deep sense of pride. He had left his mark, not through power or wealth, but by showing that the right values could change everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and share. What would you have done in Walter's shoes? Let us know your thoughts.